Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're exploring a figure whose legacy is almost universally mischaracterized, Miyamoto Musashi.
Mhm.
When you hear that name, the first image that comes to mind is usually the undefeated swordsman, right? The rogue Ronin, 60 duels, never lies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's an image that, while rooted in some history, is a profound reductionism.
Yeah.
It misses the entire point of his life's work.
It's more than just incomplete.
Oh, it is. To focus on the kill count, so to speak, or the spectacle of the duels, is to confuse the laboratory with the discovery.
The laboratory, I like that.
Musashi's true legacy, the one that's actually transformative, is psychological. It's strategic. It's profoundly inward. If you strip away all the romanticized violence, what's left isn't a warrior's biography.
What is it then?
It's a guide, a really rigorous guided reflection on discipline, on the strategic use of solitude, and on the ruthless pursuit of self-control.
And that is precisely the core objective for our deep dive today. We want to move past the myth of the swordsman to really understand the mind of the strategist and maybe even the philosopher. We've been through the source material, primarily his own work, the Book of Five Rings, and we're trying to view it not as a historical artifact, but as a framework for excellence that feels, well, incredibly modern.
And our mission here is to extract that practical, durable wisdom, the kind that transcends the sword and applies directly to you, the listener, navigating a world of, constant distraction.
World of ego, of noise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're looking for the principles of his mental architecture, not his fighting technique.
So we'll start this journey with our central anchor question, one we'll keep coming back to. What does it mean to master yourself in a world that is fundamentally designed to distract you? Okay, so let's start right there, with the thing everyone knows him for. The combat. But as we said, that's usually where the analysis starts.
Right, it's the surface level.
The sources consistently show that his legacy isn't the victories themselves, but how he used those encounters, those lethal encounters, to study the very nature of mastery. He wasn't just trying to survive.
He was studying. He wasn't obsessed with violence for its own sake, or even fame. He was focused on achieving a state of ultimate clarity, of ruthless self-honesty, especially under pressure.
And what greater pressure is there?
There is none. Combat for him was the ultimate test. It instantly exposes everything: your ego, your fear, your hesitation, your self-deception. He was looking past the physical clash to the underlying dynamics of how humans fail under pressure.
So you said earlier that combat was his laboratory. It's such a powerful metaphor. Can you unpack that a bit? What specific experiments was he running during these duels?
Well, the duels weren't just fights. They were, for him, a form of empirical research. He wasn't just focused on the mechanics of striking an opponent.
He was testing something deeper.
He was testing his ability to perceive, to anticipate, and to maintain his own internal cohesion. One of his primary experiments was reading his opponent's intention.
Which sounds a bit like mind reading.
It's not, though. It's observation that's so fine-tuned that you can anticipate movements from the most subtle cues. A shift in weight, the way a hand tightens its grip, the slight widening of an eye. He trained himself to see the entire opponent at once, not just fixate on the sword.
So he was essentially testing his own perceptual bandwidth under extreme stress.
Precisely. And another experiment was purely internal, controlling his own fear. I mean, the natural reaction to a life or death fight is a flood of adrenaline. It's panic.
Of course.
Musashi trained himself to override that instinct. He worked to maintain a state the Zen masters called mushin, or no mind. It's a state where action flows without conscious thought, without the ego interfering.
So survival, then, wasn't even the main goal.
It was a byproduct. Victory and survival were the results you got if you achieved that state of internal clarity. The learning was the point. The victory was just proof that the experiment was successful.
That distinction, that the learning was the point, is huge. Because if he could stay perfectly clear and calm while his opponent was unraveling emotionally,
Then the physical outcome was already decided.
right. And this brings us to his tactics. He was known for achieving psychological dominance, often by targeting his opponent's emotions, their pride, their impatience, their anger.
This is where you see the fight transition from a physical contest to a purely mental one. Look at his famous or infamous tactic of arriving late to duels.
People always frame that as simple arrogance.
It gets romanticized that way, yes. But the sources suggest it was a calculated psychological strategy. The best example is his duel with Sasaki Kojiro.
On Ganryu Island.
On Ganryu Island, yes. Kojiro was there, waiting, perfectly prepared, ready. Musashi shows up hours late. He's unkempt, he's just been rowed across the water, and he's even carved a makeshift wooden sword from a spare oar on the way.
So he's not just observing the situation, he's deliberately introducing a psychological variable. He's changing the conditions of the experiment.
Absolutely. By arriving late, he's weaponizing Kojiro's anticipation. He forces him to wait, to stew. And that impatience slowly curdles into anger, and then crucially, into arrogance. The thought that Musashi is disrespecting me, or maybe he's afraid.
All that internal turmoil is draining Kojiro's mental energy before a single move has been made.
Exactly. The time Kojiro spent waiting was time Musashi spent studying the effects of that induced mental decay.
So he uses provocation to fracture his opponent's emotional state. But here's a question that comes up for me. If Musashi is seeking clarity and calm for himself, how does he justify deliberately provoking chaos in his opponent? Doesn't that risk dragging him into the same emotional reactivity?
That's an excellent question, and it really gets to the subtlety of his mastery. Musashi wasn't reacting to the chaos. He was manufacturing it while remaining completely detached from it.
So it wasn't personal.
Not at all. His tactic wasn't driven by his own anger or his own pride. It was cold, calculated strategy. He was just setting the conditions for the fight to be most advantageous. The key difference is that the opponent's anger is internal and uncontrolled. Musashi's provocation is external and completely deliberate.
He was destabilizing the opponent's foundation, what he'd later call the earth ring, so that by the time the fight actually started, the opponent was already operating from a place of emotional deficit.
You've got it. That's the core insight, and it's timeless. Most people lose long before the conflict begins.
Not because of a technical mistake.
No, because of an emotional one.
And that's true of almost every high-stakes situation, whether you're in a negotiation or facing a financial crisis or even a creative block. The technical skills are often secondary to emotional regulation.
The moment you let impatience or insecurity or a need for validation dictate your actions, you've already given up the advantage. Musashi understood this centuries before we had the language of behavioral psychology to describe it.
It translates so clearly to modern challenges. If you think about leadership or managing a team through a crisis, the conflicts are almost never just technical. We have the data, we have the tools.
But we fail when the emotional temperature rises. Think about decision-making when the market is volatile. When everything is chaotic, the best leaders are the ones who can maintain that internal calm. If you panic, or you lash out, or you freeze, you become predictable, and you're easily defeated.
So mastery is about not being flooded by your own feelings. It's about responding to what's actually happening, not to the emotional echo of what just happened.
It's the ultimate internal control system.
And this brings us to one of his most iconic innovations, Niten Ichiri, the style of using two swords at once, the long katana and the shorter wakizashi.
The two heavens is one style.
Right. And many of his contemporaries saw this as, controversial? Cumbersome?
Profoundly unconventional. The traditional sword schools were dedicated to mastering a single blade. They believed using two swords would just dilute your focus. But for Musashi, the logic was simple. If you carry two tools, why would you willingly limit yourself to using only one at a time?
So he saw it not as a gimmick, but as a necessary cognitive upgrade.
Exactly. It wasn't just about learning how to swing two swords. It was about training the mind to handle dual complexity and override ingrained habits.
So what were the specific cognitive demands of that? I mean, forcing yourself to use the second sword in your non-dominant hand must have been incredibly difficult.
You required several things at once. First, balance under complexity. A second blade radically changes your physical center of gravity. Second, true independent coordination. Your non-dominant hand can't just mirror your dominant one. It has to act independently, sometimes blocking while the other attacks, sometimes creating an opening.
It sounds like a state of constant mental overload. How did he maintain his calm within that?
That was the entire point of the training. He was forcing his brain to process two separate streams of input and output at the same time, without letting one paralyze the other. He had to get to a state where using two blades felt as natural as using one.
And if you can achieve that kind of flow under that much mental pressure,
Then any single variable problem, one opponent, one task, starts to feel dramatically simpler.
This mirrors the demands of the modern world so directly. The people who really thrive today are rarely just specialists in one rigid function. They have to be integrators.
They absolutely do.
They have to combine high-level strategy with detailed execution or logic with intuition. They have to maintain focus while constantly switching contexts.
The two swords become a symbol for unified attention in a complex world. You have to be able to hold competing needs in your mind at the same time, discipline and creativity, long-term vision and short-term execution, without suffering mental paralysis. That's what Musashi was practicing, holistic functional awareness.
And that profound need for clarity, for integrated focus, it seems to lead us directly into his relationship with solitude.
It does.
To set the context, he was born in 1584, right at the tail end of the Sengoku period, the Age of Civil War. But by the time he was in his prime, Japan was unifying. Peace was setting in.
And this historical context is everything. The era of the samurai as wandering, independent warriors was ending. This created an existential crisis for the entire warrior class.
Their identity was tied to war.
To chaos, yes.
Yeah.
And stability demanded conformity. So the big question for them was, what is our purpose now that the wars are over? Many of them chose stability. They attached themselves to a powerful lord, became retainers, sought status.
But Musashi, he went in the complete opposite direction. He consistently rejected status. He rejected dependency. He chose to live as a ronin, a masterless samurai, for most of his life.
And that wasn't because he failed to find a master. It was a deliberate choice.
A strategic choice.
That choice of detachment was the bedrock of his mastery. He wasn't pursuing a comfortable life. He was pursuing something far more difficult. A complete, undistorted understanding of strategy, of himself, and of truth. His life as a ronin was a self-imposed crucible.
So we have to make this distinction really clear. Musashi's solitude was not accidental isolation. It wasn't loneliness. It was a deliberate, strategic method of refinement.
That's the key. The sources treated solitude as a practical discipline, not just a personality trait. It served a very specific function for him.
Which was?
Distraction corrupts perception, and social validation in particular puts a filter between you and reality. He sought distance from the social forces that warp your judgment.
Can you break that down? What specific forces was he trying to get away from?
He identified 4 crucial distortions that he needed to eliminate. He sought distance from praise, from comfort, from identity, and from external validation.
Okay, let's unpack those. Praise first.
If you're always chasing praise, your actions become geared toward getting approval, not toward being effective. You stop seeking the necessary painful truths about your own limitations because they don't get you applause.
And comfort.
If you always seek comfort, your internal resilience just erodes. You lose the edge you need to handle sudden, severe hardship. You become soft.
That makes sense. What about the other two, identity and external validation? They feel closely related.
They are. And they're maybe the most insidious. If your sense of self, your identity is too rigidly tied to a role, like I am an undefeated samurai, you stop adapting. You become brittle. You're defending an image, not seeking truth.
So by rejecting a fixed identity and the need for external validation, he could stay objective.
Ruthlessly objective. He could be honest with himself about what worked and what didn't without his ego getting in the way. He was a student of reality, not a performer for an audience.
And this choice to pursue, in a way, invisibility when his society was all about visible status, it runs so counter to his time and especially to ours.
Well, modern success is so often dependent on attention, isn't it? On visibility, on constant feedback loops. Musashi cultivated a deep strategic detachment. And that self-imposed invisibility is why his philosophical influence lasted for centuries, while the generals and lords who chased immediate fame are mostly forgotten. He was investing in depth, not breadth.
So we should really frame his solitude not as a retreat, but as a kind of freedom. Freedom from distortion. It was his sharpening tool, a training environment for absolute clarity.
And this leads us right to the modern parallel. Our constant digital stimulation mirrors the exact distractions Musashi was trying to avoid. We are constantly connected, constantly being fed opinions, information, reactions.
And that constant connectedness is so ironic because it actually weakens our judgment. We're always skimming the surface of our thoughts. We spend so little time in the silence that's required for deep processing, for real strategic thinking.
We become hyper-reactive. If your sense of value depends on likes and comments, your internal compass is inevitably thrown off. You start performing for the algorithm instead of optimizing for what is true and effective.
So to achieve that deep mastery, what he calls the earth ring, seeing reality as it is, you have to intentionally withdraw.
You have to. You need to get quiet enough to hear your own unbiased strategy, to see your own true limitations, and to understand the real nature of your environment.
But let's be honest about how hard that is. The sources are clear that Musashi never said this path was for everyone. Solitude sounds romantic, but It's demanding.
It's intensely demanding because it removes all your excuses. It strips away the social noise, the comfort of consensus, and when you're left alone, you are forced to confront your own deepest limitations, your own fears.
It's a confrontation with the self.
And that process is painful. It's uncomfortable, but it offers a rare and durable quality in return. Clarity without noise. In a world that is obsessed with attention, Musashi chose depth, and that depth is why we're still talking about him.
Let's move to the philosophy he actually wrote down, the culmination of all this, the Book of Five Rings. He wrote it at the very end of his life while in retreat in a cave.
Rigandu Cave, yes.
And again, we have to stress, this is not a how-to manual for sword fighting.
Not at all. He wrote this text to distill decades of brutal first-hand experience into a unified framework. He intended it as a guide to understanding conflict, perception, and mastery in any discipline. He says he's writing for those who want to learn the principle of strategy that underlies everything.
And he structures it around 5 elements, the 5 rings, which represent different stages of understanding. So let's break these down, starting with the foundation, the earth ring.
The earth ring is all about foundation. It's about grounding. It's about reality. In tactical terms, this meant knowing your position, understanding the literal terrain, the light, the footing, and crucially, knowing your own resources and limitations.
What was his main warning within the earth ring?
His central warning was against fantasy and self-deception. He's very explicit that strategy begins with seeing things exactly as they are, with no filter. If you believe you're invincible, or you ignore the fact that you're standing on slippery ground, you've already lost.
So how does that translate to the inner war we're talking about?
Earth is the demand for honest, brutal self-assessment. It's knowing your strengths and, just as importantly, your weaknesses, realistically. If you go into a negotiation without an honest appraisal of your position, or you start a business without truly understanding the market,
Your whole strategy is built on sand.
it collapses. The Earth Ring reminds us that any strategy must have a stable, undeniable foundation in reality. The first step of mastery is always to eliminate your own illusions.
Okay, so from the solidity of earth, we move to something completely different. The formlessness of water. This feels like a huge shift.
It is. Water is the principle of adaptability and flexibility. It has no fixed shape of its own. It takes the shape of whatever contains it. Yet, it never loses its essential nature or its power.
And Musashi's point was that clinging to a single rigid technique is a strategic failure.
Exactly. A rigid method will always break under unexpected pressure. True resilience comes from responding to the conditions as they are, with fluidity, rather than trying to force a pre-planned method onto a chaotic situation.
So if earth is about knowing where you stand, water's about how you move when the ground inevitably starts to shift under your feet. It's about responsiveness, but without panic.
Precisely. In a fight, this meant being able to shift your stance, change your tempo, or adopt a completely unconventional attack the moment your opponent did something unexpected.
And in modern terms.
When a project goes off the rails, or the market suddenly changes, the master doesn't cling to the obsolete business plan. They flow. They maintain that internal emotional control, that stillness, which allows them to shape their actions based on the current reality, not on a stubborn plan that failed 5 minutes ago. Water demands a mind that's constantly receptive.
All right, so after foundation and adaptability, we get to fire. This is the moment of engagement, the intensity.
Fire is the execution phase. It symbolizes the rapid, focused, decisive moment of conflict itself. And Musashi's teaching here is incredibly direct. Hesitation is more dangerous than aggression.
Once you commit fully.
100%. Once you've decided on a course of action, you must act with total decisiveness, without a shred of doubt. There's no room for half measures or second guessing once the engagement has begun.
This speaks so directly to the modern problem of analysis paralysis. How many projects or decisions fail simply because of hesitation? Because the leader commits only 80%, leaving that window open for doubt and chaos.
Fire demands total, present commitment. The failure isn't in the outcome, it's in the wavering commitment. That moment of doubt is what the opponent or the market or your circumstances will exploit. The energy of fire is what's needed to overcome both external resistance and your own internal inertia. Musashi basically says a flawed but decisive action is almost always better than a perfectly analyzed moment of paralysis.
And after the intensity of fire, we come to wind. This is about understanding other perspectives, other schools of thought. This feels like the most outward-looking of the rings.
It is. It's the strategic study of others. Musashi dedicated an entire section to analyzing the flaws and predictable habits of the other major sword schools of his day. And the key is, he wasn't studying them so he could imitate them.
He was studying them to find their weaknesses.
Their blind spots, and the fundamental, limiting assumptions of their entire system. The Wind Ring is a profound warning against intellectual insularity, against blind loyalty to any single system or ideology.
Which is incredibly relevant today in a world where everyone seems so entrenched in their own professional silos or their own social media bubbles.
Mastery requires perspective, and predictability is vulnerability. If you only surround yourself with people who agree with you, or you only read things that confirm what you already believe, you become strategically brittle. You're easy to anticipate. Wind forces you to look outside your own framework. You study the weaknesses of others to make sure they aren't secretly your own.
And that brings us to the final ring, and the most philosophical one, the void.
The void is the pinnacle of his framework. It's the stage you reach after you've deeply mastered earth, water, fire, and wind. And it's often misunderstood as just emptiness or nothingness.
But that's not what he meant.
No. For Musashi, the void represents the absence of distortion. It's the state where the mind is perfectly aligned with reality, without any interference from fear, desire, or the ego.
The path to the void sounds, well, very abstract. If the first 4 rings are about doing something, what is the void? Is it about being?
In a way, yes. It's a cessation of conscious thought about the technique. You practice the other principles so relentlessly, the grounding, the fluidity, the decisiveness, the awareness of others, that they become instinctual.
They become part of you.
They do. The void is the state where your ego dissolves, fear loses its grip, and your action arises perfectly and naturally without deliberation. The mind isn't blank, it's just uncluttered. You're not thinking about the sword or the consequences. You are simply responding perfectly to the moment. It's the clarity that's left when all the noise, both internal and external, is gone.
It's where competence becomes intuition, the highest level of mastery.
Precisely.
Okay, let's build on that. Beyond the 5 rings, there's a crucial paradox in Musashi's life that speaks so directly to our modern struggles with things like productivity and identity. He trained constantly. His entire life was defined by discipline, and yet he warned against obsession. This is the idea of discipline without attachment.
It's a subtle but incredibly powerful distinction, and it's what separates true mastery from just grinding away at a routine. He was relentless in his pursuit of perfection, but he wasn't emotionally obsessive about his methods.
What's the danger he saw in that kind of obsession?
The danger is that you become a slave to your tools, to your routines, to your rituals. If your success depends on you having a specific sword or performing a specific ritual before a duel, then you're not free, you're fragile. The form owns you.
In a modern sense, we're constantly told to optimize our routines, to find the perfect tools. Why did Musashi see that as a trap?
Because the obsession turns the means into the end. You start confusing the preparation with the actual performance. You lose that crucial water-like flexibility. True mastery, he believed, lets you pick up any challenge, any weapon, any new piece of software, any unexpected problem, and respond appropriately, because you're not tied to one rigid method. The skill is in your mind's clarity, not in the object of the routine.
This feels like such a sharp critique of what you could call modern crutches. We see this everywhere, this danger of confusing busyness with progress.
Or mistaking the aesthetics of discipline for actual competence. Think about so-called productivity culture. People can confuse their identity. I'm a person who wakes up at 4 a.m., or I use this complex to-do list app, with delivering actual value. The tools and routines become a kind of psychological comfort blanket, but they don't necessarily build robust, adaptable competence.
Musashi wanted to strip all of that away.
He stripped away the ritual, the identity, the fixed routine, until only pure, adaptable competence and internal clarity were left.
So he was forcing himself to be resilient. If your identity is all tied up in your tools or your status, you become incredibly fragile the moment those external things are taken away.
That's the ultimate test. He was testing himself against reality, not just against his own preferred conditions. If the foundation of your skill is your internal clarity, you can adapt, you can flow, you can apply that clarity across any domain. Your essential skill remains independent of the environment.
And this idea of integrated capability, it's demonstrated so beautifully by his later life, his dedication to art, to painting, calligraphy, sculpture. He wasn't just a dabbler, he became a master in these forms too.
This is where you see his idea of holistic mastery come to life. He didn't just retire to a cave to rest, he devoted himself to art with the exact same mental discipline he applied to the sword. His artwork, his minimalist ink paintings, his calligraphy, They echo the exact same principles from the Book of Five Rings.
How does the discipline of the sword translate to something like a brush?
It's all there. Focus, timing, balance, restraint. The principle of the decisive stroke fire applies perfectly to an ink brush on paper. Once the brush touches down, there's no hesitation, no correction. It's total commitment.
And it refined his perception.
It had to. It trained his eye for nuance, for composition, for movement. It required the ultimate mental stillness. He believed the same mind that could wield a sword had to also understand beauty and subtlety. It disciplines the emotions just as rigorously as a duel, but without the lethal stakes.
So he was always searching for the universal principles. He completely rejected that false divide between warrior and artist.
That's the ultimate takeaway. True mastery expresses itself across all domains. If you can achieve that clarity, the void, in one area, that clarity should inform everything you do. You're not just a swordsman or just a manager or just an artist. You're a complete human being striving for total alignment with reality.
Which brings us to the final question. After 4 centuries, why does Miyamoto Musashi, a figure from a pre-industrial feudal world, still speak so urgently to us today?
Because the battlefield has changed completely. We fight with information and attention now, not with steel, but the fundamental inner struggle hasn't changed at all. The psychological problems that he worked to solve inside himself are the exact same ones that define contemporary life.
So if we go back to our anchor question, what are the central conflicts today that his philosophy speaks to?
The conflicts today are almost entirely internal and psychological. We struggle with constant overstimulation that shatters our focus. We struggle with the ego that prevents us from honest self-assessment. We struggle with the fear of irrelevance that drives us toward mindless distraction. We are perpetually in a losing battle against the confusion within ourselves.
And that anchor question comes back. What does it mean to master yourself in a world designed to distract you? Musashi's answer is harder than any modern self-help trend, but it's infinitely more durable.
He offers no shortcuts, no 5 easy steps. He offers self-discipline that is ruthlessly honest, that's earth. He offers strategic awareness that cuts through the noise, that's wind. And he offers solitude as a primary source of strength, not as a weakness.
These qualities, depth, silence, restraint, are becoming increasingly rare. In a culture that rewards speed, volume, and constant visibility, the things Musashi cultivated are now the most valuable commodities.
Which is why his ideas apply so directly to modern leadership, to complex creative work, because they all demand internal clarity above everything else.
When you look at his life, you realize the ultimate battle is never really against a competitor or a critic or your circumstances.
Those are just the testing grounds. The single hardest, most important battle is against the confusion, the ego, and the fear within yourself. If you can achieve victory there, you can achieve it anywhere.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, it's worth reflecting on his ultimate motivation. He chose this incredibly hard life, not to achieve fame, but simply to achieve understanding, to find the way that was universally true.
The sword was never the point. It was just a mirror. A rigorous, lethal mirror that reflected back the exact state of the mind that was wielding it.
When the mind was distorted by noise or ego, the blade was clumsy.
And when the mind was clear, void of distortion, the action was perfect.
So Musashi leaves us not with a technique to copy, but with a series of really demanding questions. Questions that build on our anchor, that demand honesty and courage in a world that so often encourages comfort and distraction instead.
Can you face reality without distortion, the way the Earth Ring demands? Even when that reality is profoundly uncomfortable in your work or in your life.
Can you act without hesitation, committing fully, with fire, even when the outcome is uncertain?
And finally, maybe the greatest challenge for the modern age. Can you stand alone without losing yourself? Can you use solitude as a source of strategic strength to maintain your focus in a world that is desperate for your constant attention?
Those who can, in whatever field they're in, they're the ones walking the path of mastery. Not the path of fame or violence, but the path of truth.